My brother drained our mom's life savings to fund his luxury lifestyle while pretending to be a saint. Now he's busted, facing the consequences of his greed. My brother Elliot always handled mom's finances because he lived closer, and I trusted him completely. He'd show me spreadsheets every month proving mom's retirement savings were stable. Everything's under control, he'd say. Her medical bills are covered and there's plenty left for her care. Mom had dementia and needed round-the-clock nursing care that cost $8,000 a month. Elliot found a facility near his house and managed all the payments. I sent him $2,000 monthly to help with costs, and visited my mom every other weekend from 3 states away. Elliot would always meet me there acting like the perfect son. I go see her every single day, he'd tell the nurses loud enough for everyone to hear. Someone needs to be the responsible one. The nursing home staff loved him. He brought them donuts, remembered their birthdays, volunteered at their fundraisers. They'd tell me how lucky mom was to have such a devoted son. Meanwhile, he'd make little comments to me about how expensive everything was getting. The facility raised prices again. Mom's medications aren't covered anymore. Her savings are draining faster than expected. But whenever I offered to look at the finances myself, he'd get offended. I've got it handled. You don't trust me? I'm the one here every day while you live your life 3 states away. He had me trained to feel guilty. For 2 years, this went on perfectly. Elliot the saint, me the absent daughter sending guilt money. Then mom's condition got worse and she needed surgery. The hospital called me directly because I was listed as secondary contact. They needed a $40,000 deposit that insurance wouldn't cover. No problem, I said. Take it from her account. The billing department went quiet. Ma'am, your mother's account was closed 6 months ago. I drove through the night to get there. Elliot was already at the hospital with his fake, concerned face. There must be some confusion. I moved mom's money to a high-yield account for better returns. But he couldn't produce any statements. Couldn't name the bank. Kept saying he'd explain everything later when mom was stable. That's when I called mom's original bank myself. They told me Elliot had been withdrawing the maximum amount every single day for 2 years. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. Always just under the federal reporting limit. The account had started with 800,000 from dad's life insurance and mom's retirement. It now had 0. Elliot had stolen everything. The nursing home hadn't been paid in 4 months. They were about to evict mom. The 2,000 I sent monthly? Elliot pocketed that too. He'd been telling the facility that mom was on Medicaid and they were providing charity care. They had no idea she had money. Or used to have money. When I confronted Elliot at the hospital, he didn't even deny it. Mom would want me to be happy. I needed that money more than she did. She doesn't even know what's happening anymore. He'd bought a boat. A vacation house. His wife had a new car and designer everything. They'd gone to Europe 6 times. Posted photos all over social media about living their best life. All while mom was getting minimal care because the facility thought she was a charity case. I called Adult Protective Services from the hospital lobby. They arrived within an hour. Financial elder abuse with a vulnerable adult is a felony. Elliot tried to leave, but security stopped him. This is a family matter, he kept saying. We don't need outside involvement. The detective who showed up specialized in elder fraud. He'd seen this exact situation dozens of times. He pulled bank records right there on his laptop. Every withdrawal was traced to Elliot's personal account, then transferred to his wife's account, then used for luxury purchases. Your brother was smart enough to steal but dumb enough to leave a perfect paper trail, the detective said. Elliot's wife Tanya showed up and made things worse. She swept through the doorway wearing this cream cashmere coat I'd seen plastered all over her Instagram from their Paris trip last month. The coat probably cost more than I made in 2 months. Tanya spotted Elliot near the security desk, and her face shifted from confused to angry in half a second. She marched straight toward him and started talking loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear. She wanted to know why these people wouldn't let her husband leave. She kept saying this was ridiculous, and we were making a huge scene over nothing. The detective stood up from where he'd been reviewing documents. Tanya barely glanced at him and kept going about how this was a family matter and didn't need to involve strangers. She waved her hand around and her diamond bracelet caught the fluorescent lights. I recognized that bracelet too from her posts about their anniversary dinner at some 5-star restaurant. Every piece of jewelry she wore, every designer bag on her arm, every vacation photo she'd posted for 2 years came from mom's account. The detective cleared his throat and asked if she was Tanya Whitley. She said yes like it was obvious, and why was he wasting her time? He turned his laptop around so she could see the screen. He walked her through the bank records in this calm voice that made everything sound worse somehow. He pointed to withdrawal dates and showed her the transfers to Elliot's account. Then he pulled up her social media on another tab. There was her Paris post from the exact same week as a $20,000 withdrawal. Her Mediterranean cruise matched up with another $15,000. The ski trip to Colorado lined up with $10,000 going into her personal account. He went through 6 different vacations and matched every single one to money taken from mom's savings. Tanya's face went from tan to white in about 10 seconds. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The detective kept going and showed her the designer purchase receipts that the bank had flagged. Her car payment came directly from the transferred funds. Her jewelry purchases were right there in black and white. He explained that every item she was wearing right now, every vacation she'd enjoyed, every luxury she'd posted about online came from financial elder abuse of a vulnerable adult. She stopped talking, just stood there staring at the screen while her perfect life got dismantled line by line. Elliot tried to jump in and save the situation. He put his hand on Tanya's arm and told her I was blowing everything out of proportion. He said Mom would have wanted them to be happy and enjoy life. He actually said that out loud like it made sense. The detective cut him off before he could keep going. He said wanting to enjoy stolen money doesn't make it legal. He'd seen this exact pattern dozens of times in elder abuse cases. The justifications were always the same. The abuser always claimed the victim would have wanted them to have the money. They always minimized what they'd done. Elliot's face got red and he started saying the detective didn't understand their family situation. 2 security guards moved closer. The detective made a phone call and said he needed backup for formal statements. One guard told Elliot and Tanya they needed to come to separate rooms. Tanya started crying and asking why they had to be separated. The detective said it was standard procedure for witness statements and fraud investigations. Elliot tried to argue, but the guards weren't having it. They each took one of them down different hallways. I watched the whole thing happen and my hands were shaking, so hard I had to shove them in my pockets. The perfect couple act was falling apart right in front of me. They couldn't get their stories straight if they couldn't talk to each other. Elliot kept looking back at Tanya as they walked him away. She was sobbing into her hands and her mascara was running down her face. All that Instagram perfection was gone. A woman in scrubs with a hospital badge walked up and introduced herself as Ophelia Schultz from Adult Protective Services. She'd gotten the call less than an hour ago. She sat down next to me and started asking questions about Mom's current situation. I told her about the surgery Mom needed, about the $40,000 deposit we didn't have, about the nursing home that hadn't been paid in 4 months. Ophelia's face got tighter with every detail. She pulled out paperwork and said we needed to get emergency Medicaid started immediately. She asked about Mom's current assets, and I had to tell her there were none. 0. Elliot had taken everything. She wrote notes and made phone calls right there in the waiting room. Another man showed up about 20 minutes later. He had on khakis and a polo shirt with the nursing home's logo on it. Chester Hansen introduced himself as the administrator. The detective had called him about the fraud investigation. Chester's face was red and he kept clenching his jaw. He said Elliot had told them Mom was on Medicaid from the start. They'd been providing charity care for 4 months thinking she had no money. The whole time Elliot had access to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Chester said he was going to sue Elliot personally for every cent of those unpaid bills. He had documentation of every conversation where Elliot claimed poverty. Every time Elliot had promised payment was coming through Medicaid. All of it was lies while Elliot bought boats and vacation houses. Ophelia finished her phone calls and came back to sit with me. She said we had a decision to make about Mom's surgery. We could proceed without the deposit and figure out payment later. Or we could delay treatment while we sorted out the financial mess. My stomach hurt thinking about either option. Ophelia said Mom's immediate health had to come first. We'd deal with Elliot's theft and the money problems after Mom was stable and safe. I asked what happened if the Medicaid application got denied. Ophelia said it wouldn't be because Mom clearly qualified now. But there was paperwork and processing time. The hospital needed an answer now. I found someone from billing and explained the situation. They looked at Ophelia's emergency application paperwork. They talked to their supervisor. Finally, they said they'd proceed with surgery based on the Medicaid application, but I had to sign papers taking financial responsibility if the application got denied. My hand shook while I signed my name. $40,000. I didn't have $40,000. But I couldn't let Mom suffer because my brother was a thief. They wheeled Mom into surgery 30 minutes later. She was confused and kept asking for Elliot. I told her he'd be there soon and she smiled at me. The nurses took her through the double doors and I sat down hard in the waiting room chair. The detective came and found me while Mom was in surgery. He needed detailed information about the financial reports Elliot had shown me. I pulled up my email on my phone and started scrolling back 2 years. Every month, Elliot had sent me a spreadsheet. The balance always looked stable. The expenses always seemed reasonable. I'd never questioned any of it. The detective took photos of every single email. He photographed the fake spreadsheets. He documented Elliot's explanations about rising costs. All of it was evidence of deliberate deception. The detective said these emails proved Elliot knew exactly what he was doing. He'd created false documents to keep me sending money and not asking questions. This wasn't a mistake or poor judgment. It was calculated fraud over a 2-year period. A man in an expensive suit showed up and asked for Elliot. He introduced himself as Jonah Bates and said he was Elliot's attorney. He started talking about how this was a family dispute that didn't need criminal involvement. The detective didn't even let him finish. He said stealing $800,000 from a vulnerable adult with dementia was absolutely a criminal matter. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, social media posts, luxury purchases, fake financial documents. Elliot had left a perfect paper trail of his crimes. Jonah tried to say something about Elliot's character, and the detective cut him off again. He said character didn't matter when the evidence was this clear. Jonah grabbed Elliot's arm and pulled him toward a small consultation room down the hallway. Through the glass window, I watched my brother's face crumble as Jonah talked and gestured at papers he'd pulled from his briefcase. Elliot kept shaking his head and wiping his eyes with both hands. His shoulders shook and he gestured wildly at the ceiling, at the floor, at Jonah. The perfect son act was completely gone. He looked like what he actually was, a man who'd been caught stealing from his own mother and couldn't talk his way out of it anymore. Jonah kept pointing at something on his phone screen and Elliot just covered his face with his hands. I'd never seen my brother cry like that, not even at Dad's funeral. Back then, he'd been calm and together, the strong one who handled everything. Now he was falling apart because he finally had to face what he'd done, instead of just lying to everyone. An older couple rushed into the waiting area about 20 minutes later. The woman had gray hair and wore a cardigan, and the man was in khakis and a polo shirt. They looked around confused until they spotted Tanya sitting in the corner with her face in her hands. The woman hurried over and Tanya stood up and just collapsed into her arms, sobbing. The man looked at the detective and asked what was happening. The detective introduced himself and explained that their daughter's husband had been stealing from his elderly mother with dementia. Tanya's mom looked shocked and kept saying there must be some mistake. Tanya pulled away from her mother and started talking fast, saying she didn't know where the money came from. She said Elliot handled all their finances and she just thought they were doing well. The detective pulled out his laptop again and showed them the bank records. He pointed at specific transactions, luxury purchases that went straight from Mom's account, to Elliot's account, to Tanya's account. Then he showed them Tanya's Instagram posts from their 6 trips to Europe, the boat, the vacation house, the designer clothes. Tanya's dad asked how much money was involved, and the detective said $800,000 stolen from a vulnerable adult. Tanya's mom made a small sound and sat down hard in a chair. The detective explained that willful ignorance wasn't a legal defense when you're spending stolen money. If Tanya went on every vacation and made every luxury purchase, she had to know something was wrong. Normal people don't suddenly have unlimited money for boats and European trips. Tanya kept crying and saying she thought Elliot's business was doing really well. But the detective pointed out that Elliot worked a regular office job with public salary information available online. There was no business, just stolen money from his mother with dementia. A nurse came out through the double doors and called my name. She said Mom was out of surgery and everything went well. They were moving her to recovery and I could see her in about 30 minutes. I felt my whole body relax a little bit. At least Mom was okay physically. The financial disaster could wait. The nurse asked if I had questions and I said no, just wanted to see Mom as soon as possible. She smiled and said she'd come get me when Mom was settled in recovery. I sat back down and put my head in my hands. Tanya's parents were still talking to the detective in low voices. Tanya was on her phone now, probably texting people about what was happening. Elliot and Jonah were still in the consultation room and I could see Elliot pacing back and forth. The nurse came back 45 minutes later and took me to Mom's recovery room. Mom was lying in the hospital bed with tubes and monitors attached. Her eyes were closed and her face looked so small and old. I pulled a chair up next to the bed and took her hand. It felt fragile, like bird bones. I started crying because she had no idea what Elliot had done. She trusted him completely. Thought he was taking care of everything while she got sicker and more confused. In her mind, Elliot was still the perfect devoted son who visited every day and managed all her finances responsibly. She'd never understand that he destroyed her financial security to buy boats and take vacations. Mom's eyes opened a little and she looked around confused. She asked where she was and I told her she just had surgery but everything went fine. She squeezed my hand and asked if Elliot was coming. I said he'd be there soon, which was a lie, but I couldn't explain the truth. She smiled and closed her eyes again. She said Elliot was such a good boy, always taking care of her, never missed a visit. My heart broke listening to her praise the son who'd stolen everything from her. She'd never know what he did. Her dementia would protect her from that pain at least. But I'd know. I'd carry the weight of Elliot's betrayal for both of us. The detective appeared in the doorway about 2 hours later with another officer. He asked if I could step into the hallway. I kissed Mom's forehead and followed them out. The detective said they were formally arresting Elliot on charges of financial exploitation of an elderly person and theft over $100,000. He asked if I wanted to be present when they took him into custody. I said yes. We walked back to the main waiting area where Elliot was now sitting with Jonah. Tanya and her parents were gone. The detective approached Elliot and told him to stand up. Elliot looked at Jonah, who nodded. The detective started reading Elliot his rights while the other officer pulled out handcuffs. Elliot's face went white. He started saying this wasn't necessary. He'd cooperate. There was no need for handcuffs. The detective ignored him and turned Elliot around to cuff his hands behind his back. Watching my brother get arrested felt completely unreal. Like I was in a movie instead of standing in a hospital hallway watching real police officers handcuff my actual brother. Elliot looked at me with tears running down his face and said he was sorry. I didn't say anything back. The officers led him toward the elevator and Jonah followed behind them carrying his briefcase. The detective came back a few minutes later and found me standing in the hallway. He said Tanya wasn't being arrested right now, but would likely face civil liability for benefiting from the stolen money. The prosecutor would decide if criminal charges were appropriate for her. Right now, the focus was on Elliot as the primary perpetrator. I asked what happened next, and the detective explained Elliot would be booked and arraigned, probably tomorrow morning. Jonah would try to get bail set, but given the amount stolen and the vulnerable victim, bail might be high. The detective gave me his card and said to call if I remembered anything else, or if Elliot tried to contact me. I thanked him and went back to Mom's room. She was awake again and asking for water. I helped her drink from a straw and she smiled at me. She asked if I'd seen Elliot and I said he had to leave for work. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Her devoted son had important responsibilities. I went down to the hospital cafeteria around 6 and bought a sandwich I couldn't eat. Then I sat at a table and called my Aunt Jillian. She answered on the second ring asking how Mom's surgery went. I told her the surgery went fine, but there was something else. I explained everything. The closed bank account, the stolen $800,000, Elliot's luxury purchases, the unpaid nursing home bills, the arrest. Jillian was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said she was booking a flight right now. She said she knew Elliot was too good to be true, too perfect, too devoted. But she never imagined he'd actually steal from his own mother. She asked what I needed and I said just for her to come. She said she'd be there tomorrow morning and we'd figure everything out together. After we hung up, I just sat in the cafeteria crying. Having someone else know the truth, having backup, made everything feel slightly less impossible. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and pulled up my email. Then I started going back through every message Elliot had sent me over the past 2 years. The monthly financial updates with the fake spreadsheets showing Mom's account was stable. The casual comments about rising costs and how expensive everything was getting. The guilt trips about me living far away while he handled everything. Every single email was designed to manipulate me, to keep me sending money without asking questions, to make me feel like the bad daughter while he played the hero. I found one from 8 months ago where he said Mom's medications were getting more expensive, and maybe I could increase my monthly contribution. I'd sent him an extra $500 that month. He'd probably spent it on boat fuel or fancy dinners. Another email from a year ago where he thanked me for trusting him with Mom's care and said he knew it was hard being so far away. He'd attached a spreadsheet showing Mom had $600,000 in savings. The account was already nearly empty by then. Every word was a lie. Every number was made up. Every thank you was manipulation. I went through 2 years of emails seeing all his tactics clearly now. The way he'd always position himself as the responsible one. The way he'd make little comments about my absence. The way he'd never quite answer direct questions about specific expenses. It was all calculated to keep me guilty and grateful and sending money while he drained Mom's account. Aunt Jillian called me at 7 the next morning saying she'd landed and was getting a rental car. She arrived at the hospital by 8:30 and went straight to Mom's room. I was sitting with Mom when Jillian walked in. Mom's face lit up seeing her sister and she reached out both hands. Jillian hugged Mom carefully because of all the tubes and monitors. Then she looked at me with fury in her eyes. She asked to see the nursing home where Mom had been staying. We left Mom with a nurse and drove to the facility. Chester met us in his office and showed Jillian the records. 4 months of unpaid bills totaling $32,000. Documentation of every conversation where Elliot had claimed Mom was on Medicaid. Photos of Mom's room, which was nice, but basic because they thought she was charity care. Jillian got more and more angry looking at everything. She asked Chester what happened next, and he explained he was planning to sue Elliot to recover the money. It was clearly documented that Elliot was responsible for payments and had the means to pay, but chose not to. Jillian said she'd help however she could with Mom's care and expenses going forward. Chester seemed relieved to hear that. He said Mom could stay at the facility if we could get current on the bills and set up reliable payment going forward. Ophelia called later that morning and asked me to meet her at the hospital. She brought a huge folder of paperwork for the emergency Medicaid application. We sat in a conference room and she walked me through every form. We had to prove Mom had no assets, which was true now thanks to Elliot. We had to show she needed skilled nursing care, which her dementia clearly proved. We had to provide medical records, financial statements, and detailed care plans. Ophelia helped me fill out form after form, explaining what each section meant and what documentation we needed. The process was completely overwhelming. Every form asked for information about Mom's finances that didn't exist anymore because Elliot had stolen everything. Ophelia said the application would take 4 to 6 weeks to process. In the meantime, I'd have to cover Mom's care costs out of pocket or negotiate with the nursing home. She said once Medicaid was approved, the facility would get paid going forward. But the back bills were still my responsibility to figure out. I signed my name on the last form, feeling exhausted and scared about how I'd manage everything. The detective called me the next morning while I was still at the hotel. He'd gotten a search warrant for Elliot's house and found everything. There was a folder on his computer labeled Personal Budget that tracked every luxury purchase he'd made with Mom's money. The boat was listed at $48,000, the vacation house at $215,000, Tanya's car at $62,000, 6 trips to Europe averaging $12,000 each, designer clothes and jewelry totaling another $30,000. He'd kept a spreadsheet showing the dates and amounts, cross-referenced with Mom's account withdrawals. The detective said it proved Elliot knew exactly what he was doing and how much he was stealing. He wasn't confused about finances or making mistakes. He was running a calculated theft operation while pretending to be Mom's devoted caregiver. The spreadsheet even had notes like, keep under 10,000, and space out withdrawals, which showed he understood the federal reporting requirements he was trying to avoid. Elliot made bail that same afternoon. Tanya's parents posted the bond, which was set at $50,000. The detective called to tell me and my stomach dropped. I was scared Elliot would try to contact me or show up at the hospital to mess with Mom's care. The detective assured me there were protective orders in place. Elliot couldn't come within 500 feet of Mom or the hospital. He couldn't contact me directly or through anyone else. If he violated the order, he'd go straight to jail without bond. The detective said they'd notify hospital security about the protective order, and Elliot's photo would be flagged in their system. I still felt anxious knowing he was out walking around instead of sitting in a cell where he belonged. Crystal Adkins called me that evening. She was the prosecutor assigned to Elliot's case. She had a calm voice that made me feel slightly less panicked about everything. She explained the charges against Elliot. Financial exploitation of an elderly person in the first degree because the amount was over $100,000. Theft in the first degree for the same reason. Both were felonies that carried serious prison time. She said she'd handled many elder abuse cases during her career, and Elliot's was particularly bad. The amount stolen was massive. The theft was systematic and planned over 2 years. He'd manipulated family trust to keep me from discovering what he was doing. He'd lied to the nursing home about Mom being on charity care. He'd spent the money on luxury items while Mom was about to be evicted from her facility. Crystal said cases like this made her angry because they involved the most vulnerable victims who couldn't protect themselves. She promised she'd fight hard to get justice for Mom. I had to figure out where Mom would go after the hospital discharged her. Chester from the nursing home made it clear Mom couldn't return there with $32,000 in unpaid bills. Ophelia suggested several facilities that accepted emergency Medicaid placements while Mom's application was processing. She gave me a list of 5 places and I started calling them. The first 2 had no available beds. The third had a bed. But when I asked about their dementia care program, the person on the phone got vague and said they handled all types of residents. The 4th place had a bed and a dementia unit, but when I looked them up online, the reviews were terrible. Families complaining about neglect and poor conditions. The 5th place, Riverside Care Center, had a bed available and decent reviews. Ophelia said it was one of the better facilities that accepted Medicaid patients, but she warned me it wouldn't be anything like the place Elliot had chosen for Mom. The rooms were smaller. The staff was stretched thin. The amenities were basic. I felt furious at Elliot all over again. Mom had $800,000 that should have paid for excellent care for years. Instead, she was going to a budget facility because her son stole everything. Jillian and I visited 3 nursing homes the next day. We started with Riverside even though I'd already basically decided on it. The building was older but clean. The lobby had worn furniture and outdated decorations. We met with the admissions director who showed us the dementia unit. The hallways were narrow and the paint was faded. Residents sat in wheelchairs along the walls looking bored. The rooms were tiny compared to where Mom had been. 2 beds crammed into a space that felt claustrophobic. Shared bathrooms between rooms. No private areas for families to visit. The staff seemed tired and rushed. One aide was trying to help 3 different residents at once. Jillian kept her face neutral during the tour, but I could see her jaw was tight. After Riverside, we visited the other 2 facilities on Ophelia's list that had beds. Both were worse. One smelled like urine the moment we walked in. The other had residents just sitting in the hallways with nobody paying attention to them. We went back to Riverside because it was clearly the best option available, even though it made me want to cry. The nice facility where Mom had been staying had spacious rooms and attentive staff and activities every day. The places we could actually afford now felt like warehouses where people were stored until they died. We chose Riverside because we had no choice. I signed the admission papers in the director's office feeling like I was failing Mom. The director was professional and kind, but she couldn't hide that this was a budget operation. She explained the facility provided basic care and medications, but extras like specialized therapy or activities cost additional money. I'd have to supply Mom's toiletries and clothing and any comfort items for her room. Visiting hours were limited to avoid disrupting the care schedule. I knew intellectually that Elliot was the one who destroyed Mom's options by stealing everything. But signing those papers felt like I was putting Mom in a place she didn't deserve after Dad had worked so hard to leave her financially secure. Crystal met with me 2 days later to prepare for potential trial testimony. We sat in a conference room at the prosecutor's office and she walked me through what would happen if the case went to trial. I'd need to testify about Elliot's manipulation tactics, how he'd positioned himself as the responsible son while making me feel guilty for living far away, how he'd sent me fake financial reports every month showing Mom's account was stable, how I'd sent him $2,000 monthly believing it was helping Mom's care, how he'd always deflected when I offered to look at the finances myself. Crystal said my testimony would establish the pattern of deception Elliot used to keep stealing without getting caught. She also needed me to bring every email Elliot had sent over 2 years with the fake spreadsheets attached. Those would be entered as evidence showing his deliberate fraud. Crystal seemed confident the case was strong. The bank records proved the theft. The spreadsheet on Elliot's computer proved he knew what he was doing. My testimony would prove the manipulation. She thought Elliot would likely take a plea deal rather than face a jury with all that evidence against him. Chester's lawsuit against Elliot moved forward at the same time. His lawyer filed papers in civil court to recover the $32,000 in unpaid nursing home bills. The lawyer explained they'd also go after Elliot's luxury assets. The boat and vacation house would be seized and sold to pay what he owed. Tanya's car might be seized too, since it was purchased with stolen money even though the title was in her name. Hearing that gave me grim satisfaction. Elliot's fancy lifestyle was about to disappear piece by piece. The boat he'd bought to show off at the marina would be auctioned. The vacation house where he'd hosted parties would be taken. Everything he'd valued more than Mom's care would be stripped away. It wouldn't bring back the money he'd already spent on trips and clothes and restaurants, but at least some of Mom's stolen funds would be recovered. Mom was discharged from the hospital 5 days after her surgery. I spent the morning getting her settled at Riverside. Her new room was on the second floor of the dementia unit. The room had 2 beds separated by a thin curtain. Mom's roommate was a woman named Dorothy, who just stared at the wall and didn't respond when we said hello. I unpacked Mom's clothes into the small dresser and put her photos on the narrow nightstand. The room felt institutional and sad compared to her previous place. Mom was confused about where she was and why everything looked different. She kept asking for Elliot. When was Elliot coming to visit? Where was Elliot? Why wasn't Elliot there to help her get settled? I had to make up a story about Elliot being away for work. I couldn't tell her the truth that her beloved son had stolen everything from her and was now facing felony charges. Mom's mind couldn't process that kind of betrayal. It was better to let her think Elliot was just busy, even though lying to her made me feel sick. Jillian stayed for a week to help me manage everything. She took time off from her job and extended her hotel reservation. Having her there made a huge difference. She came with me to meet with Ophelia about the Medicaid application. She sat with Mom at Riverside while I dealt with lawyers and police reports. She helped me organize all the financial documents the prosecutor needed. She was furious at Elliot and said she couldn't understand how he'd done this to his own mother. Jillian kept apologizing for not checking on Mom's situation more carefully herself. She lived 4 states away and had trusted Elliot just like I had. She said she should have insisted on seeing the financial records or visiting more often. I told her it wasn't her fault. Elliot had fooled everyone with his perfect son act, but Jillian still felt guilty. We spent evenings in my hotel room going through paperwork, and she'd shake her head and say she just couldn't believe Elliot had been that selfish and cruel. The week after Elliot's arrest got filled with phone calls and meetings that made everything feel more real. Crystal called me on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in the hotel room going through another stack of Mom's bills. She got straight to the point. Elliot's lawyer had contacted her with a plea deal offer. Elliot would plead guilty to reduced charges instead of going to trial. Crystal walked me through what this meant. We could accept the deal and guarantee a conviction, or we could push for full prosecution and risk a jury trial. Elder abuse cases were tricky to prosecute, she explained. Juries sometimes felt sympathy for family members who claimed they were just helping themselves to money they thought would be theirs eventually. The plea deal would mean certainty. A trial meant gambling on 12 strangers understanding how calculated and deliberate Elliot's theft had been. Crystal wanted to meet in person to go over the details before I made any decision. I drove to her office the next day, a government building downtown with security checkpoints and metal detectors at every entrance. Her office was small and crowded with filing cabinets and case folders stacked on every surface. She pulled out Elliot's file and spread the plea offer across her desk. Elliot would plead guilty to felony financial exploitation of an elderly person. He'd get 5 years probation instead of prison time. He'd be ordered to pay restitution of $200,000. That number hit me hard. $200,000 out of $800,000 stolen. Crystal saw my face and explained they could only order restitution for what they could realistically collect. Elliot's assets would be seized and sold. The boat, the vacation house, maybe Tanya's car. But everything he'd already spent on trips and restaurants and clothes was just gone. You can't get back money that's been converted into experiences and used up. The math made me sick. Elliot had stolen everything and we'd recover maybe a quarter of it if we were lucky. Crystal kept talking through the terms. Elliot would be a convicted felon. That meant serious long-term problems for him. Difficulty getting jobs, difficulty getting housing, difficulty getting loans or credit. His reputation would be destroyed. Everyone would know he stole from his own mother with dementia. That wasn't nothing, Crystal pointed out. For someone like Elliot who cared so much about appearing perfect, being a known thief and felon would be its own kind of punishment. But I wanted him in prison. I wanted him to actually suffer real consequences, not just probation where he'd still be free to live his life. Crystal understood my anger, but she was practical about the realities. Elder abuse trials were hard to win. Defense attorneys played on family dynamics and made it seem like misunderstandings rather than deliberate crimes. Juries didn't always grasp the severity of financial exploitation when the victim had dementia and couldn't testify about the harm done to them. A guaranteed felony conviction with restitution was better than risking acquittal. Plus, trials took months or even years. Mom needed care now. The restitution money would help pay for that care. Crystal also pointed out that even with a guilty plea, Elliot would be a convicted felon forever. That label didn't go away. Every job application, every apartment rental, every background check for the rest of his life would show he was convicted of stealing from his elderly mother. That reality would follow him everywhere. I left Crystal's office feeling torn and angry and exhausted. I wanted justice, but I also wanted certainty. I wanted Elliot in prison, but I also wanted Mom's care paid for. Aunt Jillian met me for dinner that night at a quiet restaurant near my hotel. I laid out everything Crystal had told me about the plea deal. Jillian listened carefully while I talked through all my conflicting feelings about accepting reduced charges. She was quiet for a minute after I finished. Then she gave me her perspective. She thought I should accept the plea deal. A trial would be months of stress and uncertainty. It would mean testifying and reliving all of Elliot's lies and manipulation. It would mean risking that a jury might not convict him, which would be devastating after everything we'd been through. The plea deal guaranteed Elliot would be a convicted felon. It guaranteed some money would be recovered for Mom's care. It guaranteed Elliot would be barred from ever accessing Mom or her finances again. And most importantly, Jillian pointed out, Elliot's reputation was already destroyed. Everyone in his life knew what he'd done. The nursing home staff knew. His neighbors knew. His co-workers knew. The people at his marina knew. The people he'd volunteered with knew. His perfect son image was shattered completely. That reputation had been his most valuable possession, the thing he'd worked hardest to maintain. Losing it was a punishment that would hurt Elliot more than prison time might. I thought about that for a long time. Elliot had always cared desperately about what people thought of him. That's why he'd brought donuts to the nursing home and volunteered at fundraisers and posted constantly on social media about being the devoted son. His image was everything to him. Now everyone knew the truth. He was a thief who stole from his own mother. That knowledge would follow him forever, even after probation ended. I called Crystal the next morning and told her I'd accept the plea deal on one condition. Elliot had to be permanently barred from any contact with Mom or any involvement in her affairs. No visits, no phone calls, no access to any information about her care or finances. Crystal said that was standard in these cases and would definitely be part of the protective order. The court took elder abuse seriously once it was proven. Elliot would never be able to manipulate Mom or her money again. The plea hearing got scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I had to deal with the immediate crisis of Mom's care costs. The emergency Medicaid application was still processing through the system, which apparently took weeks or even months. Mom's care at the new facility cost $6,000 a month. I was covering it out of my own savings account while waiting for Medicaid approval. My savings were draining fast. I'd already spent $8,000 on Mom's immediate needs since discovering Elliot's theft. Another $6,000 was due at the end of the month. I had enough to cover maybe 2 more months before I'd be in serious financial trouble myself. The stress of watching my own money disappear while waiting for government bureaucracy to process paperwork was overwhelming. Chester called me a few days later about the nursing home lawsuit. His facility's lawyer had filed papers to recover the $32,000 in unpaid bills Elliot owed. Chester explained they were willing to pause the lawsuit until after Elliot's criminal case resolved. The restitution order would legally obligate Elliot to pay back what he owed. If Elliot paid through the criminal restitution, the civil lawsuit would become unnecessary. But Chester made it very clear that if Elliot didn't pay, the facility would pursue collection aggressively. They'd go after every asset Elliot had. They'd garnish any wages he earned. They'd put liens on any property he owned. The nursing home had provided care in good faith, and they intended to be paid for it. I understood. Chester had been more than fair about the whole situation. His facility had been lied to and manipulated just like I had been. They deserved to recover what they were owed. I started going through all of Mom's paperwork to understand the full scope of the financial damage Elliot had caused. I spread everything out on the hotel room bed and organized it into categories. Medical bills that hadn't been paid in months. Insurance policies that had lapsed because Elliot stopped paying premiums. Subscriptions and services that had been canceled. Mom's dental insurance had lapsed, so she'd missed 2 scheduled cleanings and now needed expensive work done. Her supplemental health insurance had been canceled, leaving gaps in her coverage. Her life insurance policy had lapsed, which meant if she died, there'd be nothing to cover funeral costs. Elliot had let absolutely everything fall apart while he spent Mom's money on boats and vacations. Every bill I found made me angrier. He'd been so focused on funding his luxury lifestyle that he'd stopped managing any of Mom's actual needs. 2 weeks after Elliot's arrest, Tanya filed for divorce. Her lawyer made it very clear in the filing that she was trying to protect herself from liability for Elliot's crimes. She claimed she hadn't known where the money came from and shouldn't be held responsible for her husband's theft. I had zero sympathy for her. She'd gone on every vacation Elliot paid for with stolen money. She'd driven the car he bought with stolen money. She'd worn the clothes and jewelry he bought with stolen money. She'd posted photos all over social media showing off their luxury lifestyle while Mom was getting minimal care. Tanya had enjoyed every single dollar Elliot stole. But I understood why she was filing for divorce. Her parents apparently had money of their own, and she was trying to make sure Elliot's criminal restitution didn't touch her parents' assets. She wanted to separate her finances from Elliot's before the court started seizing everything. The asset seizure process moved forward quickly. The court ordered Elliot's boat and vacation house to be seized and sold to pay restitution. I got copies of all the legal documents in the mail. There were photos of Elliot's purchases attached to the seizure orders. The boat was a 40-foot luxury cruiser with a full cabin and every upgrade available. Elliot had paid $65,000 for it with Mom's money. The vacation house was a 3-bedroom place near a lake with a dock and a view. Elliot had paid $140,000 for it with Mom's money. Seeing the photos made me physically sick. Elliot had bought a 40-foot boat while Mom was about to be evicted from her care facility. He'd bought a vacation house while Mom's insurance policies were lapsing and her medical bills were piling up unpaid. He'd spent more on toys for himself than Mom's entire year of care would have cost. The documents showed every luxury purchase in detail. The boat, the house, Tanya's car, a brand new sedan that cost $38,000, 6 trips to Europe totaling over $50,000, designer clothes and jewelry for Tanya totaling $20,000, restaurant bills and entertainment expenses totaling another $30,000. Elliot had spent over $400,000 of Mom's money in 2 years on pure luxury items, while telling me how expensive Mom's care was getting, while guilting me for living 3 states away, while pretending to be the devoted son who sacrificed everything for his mother. I printed out every email Elliot sent me over 2 years, and brought them to the plea hearing in a thick folder that felt heavy in my hands. Crystal told me to read my victim impact statement slowly and clearly, looking at the judge instead of Elliot. The courtroom was small and cold, with fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out. Elliot sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than Mom's monthly care, and I wanted to rip it off him because he'd bought it with her money. The judge called my name, and I walked to the podium with my folder of printed lies. I started reading about Mom's confusion when we had to move her to the cheaper facility, how she kept asking why her room was different and where all her things went. I described finding unpaid medical bills and canceled insurance policies while Elliot posted vacation photos on social media. My voice cracked when I talked about the $2,000 I sent every month thinking I was helping Mom, not funding my brother's boat payments. I told the judge about visiting Mom every other weekend for 2 years, while Elliot pretended to be the devoted son, when really he was stealing from her daily and lying to everyone, including the nursing home staff. The betrayal was the worst part, I said, because I'd trusted him completely, and he'd used that trust to systematically drain everything Dad left to take care of Mom. When I finished, my hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. Elliot's lawyer stood up next, and Elliot walked to the podium looking like he'd been crying, but I knew it was fake because he'd looked concerned at the hospital too, and that had been a complete act. He started talking about financial problems and bad decisions, using passive language like the money just disappeared instead of admitting he stole it. He said he loved Mom and never meant to hurt anyone, which made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. He cried actual tears talking about how much Mom meant to him, and I wanted to scream that loving someone means protecting them, not robbing them blind while they have dementia. He never once said sorry directly to Mom or to me. He just talked about himself and his problems, and how hard things had been for him, like he was the victim instead of the person who stole $800,000 from his own mother. The judge let him finish, and then her expression turned cold. She said she'd reviewed the case thoroughly, and was disgusted by Elliot's actions, her voice sharp enough to cut. She accepted the plea deal, but made it clear this was one of the most disturbing elder abuse cases she'd seen because of the systematic nature of the theft and the manipulation of family trust. She sentenced him to 5 years probation, 500 hours of community service at an elder care facility, where he'd see firsthand the people he'd victimized, and ordered $200,000 in restitution. She also permanently barred him from any contact with Mom or access to her financial affairs, and said if he violated that order even once, he'd go straight to prison. Elliot's face went pale when she said prison, like he'd actually believed he'd walk away with nothing but a slap on the wrist. Walking out of the courthouse afterward, I felt exhausted and angry that Elliot wasn't going to actual prison for what he did. Crystal walked beside me down the courthouse steps and said she understood my frustration, but wanted me to remember that Elliot was now a convicted felon. That conviction would follow him forever, she explained, making it nearly impossible to get professional jobs or rent decent housing. His perfect reputation was completely destroyed, and everyone in his life now knew he was a thief who stole from his own mother with dementia. That would be its own kind of prison, Crystal said, because Elliot had always cared more about his image than anything else. 2 weeks later, I got paperwork about the asset seizure process moving forward. The court had ordered Elliot's boat and vacation house to be sold to pay restitution, with detailed listings and appraisals attached. The boat sold fast to someone who didn't care about its history, bringing in $45,000. The vacation house took longer because the market was slow, but it finally sold for $120,000, which was way less than the $140,000 Elliot paid for it. Seeing those numbers on paper felt like a small victory, even though it was nowhere near the full amount he stole. At least some of Mom's money was coming back instead of being completely gone forever. Tanya's divorce went through quickly because she'd filed immediately after Elliot's arrest. Her lawyer made sure she got to keep her car and personal items, but she had to return several pieces of expensive jewelry that were purchased with stolen funds. The court traced the jewelry purchases directly to withdrawals from Mom's account, so they counted as stolen property that had to be recovered. Tanya moved back in with her parents and apparently started telling people she had no idea what Elliot was doing with the money, which nobody believed because she'd gone on every vacation and posted about their luxury lifestyle constantly. 6 weeks after I submitted Mom's emergency Medicaid application, I got a letter saying it was approved. I actually cried reading that letter in my car outside the post office, because it meant the facility would be paid going forward, and I could stop draining my own savings to cover Mom's care. I'd been pulling money from my retirement account and racking up credit card debt trying to keep Mom housed and fed, while the legal process dragged on. The approval didn't help with the backlog of unpaid bills that had piled up during the application processing, but at least I could stop the bleeding. The first restitution payment arrived as a check for $25,000 from the boat sale, minus legal fees and court costs. I drove straight to the nursing home and handed it to Chester, who looked surprised that any money was actually being recovered. He deposited it immediately toward Mom's debt, which had grown to over $30,000 with late fees and interest. Seeing that balance drop felt like the first real progress since discovering Elliot's theft, even though there was still so much left to recover. Aunt Jillian flew in for a weekend to help me set up a proper financial management system for Mom's care. We opened a new checking account with only my name on it, no joint access for anyone else. Jillian helped me create a spreadsheet to track every expense and set up automatic payments for Mom's monthly facility costs. We built in safeguards like requiring 2 signatures for withdrawals over a certain amount, and quarterly audits where Jillian would review all the statements. Nobody was ever going to steal from Mom again, not on my watch. 3 months after Elliot's arrest, I'd settled into a new routine that felt both familiar and completely different. I still visited Mom every other weekend like before, driving 3 states to spend time with her in the facility. But now I was actually in control of her finances instead of blindly trusting someone else. I could verify she was getting proper care, and that every dollar was being spent on her needs instead of someone else's boat payments. The facility staff knew me as the daughter who managed everything now, not the absent one who just sent money. The vacation house sale closed 8 weeks after Elliot's plea hearing, bringing in $120,000 that went straight to Chester at the nursing home. I drove over to deliver the check personally instead of mailing it, wanting to see his face when the debt finally got cleared. Chester took the check and looked at it for a long moment before nodding once and putting it in his desk drawer. He thanked me in a professional voice that had none of the warmth he used to have when Elliot brought donuts and played the perfect son. I understood why he was cold toward me now, even though I wasn't the one who committed fraud. His facility got screwed by Elliot's lies for months, and I was still connected to that mess whether I wanted to be or not. I made sure to set up automatic payments from Mom's new account that day, showing Chester the confirmation email right there in his office. The payments would hit on the first of every month without fail, rebuilding whatever trust could be rebuilt after everything Elliot destroyed. Chester's expression softened just slightly when he saw the automatic payment setup, and he mentioned that consistency would be appreciated going forward. The anger at Elliot kept me up at night, replaying every fake spreadsheet he showed me, and every guilt trip about living 3 states away. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning furious about some specific lie he told, like the time he claimed Mom's medications weren't covered anymore, when really he was pocketing that money for his boat payments. Aunt Jillian suggested I talk to someone professional about it instead of letting the rage eat me alive, so I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma. The first session was awkward because I didn't know how to explain that my brother stole $800,000 from our mom while I sent him money every month like an idiot. But the therapist didn't act shocked or judgmental, just asked questions about Elliot's manipulation tactics and how long the deception lasted. She helped me see that Elliot's manipulation was sophisticated and deliberate, not something I should have caught earlier. He spent 2 years building an elaborate system of lies with fake documents and carefully crafted guilt trips, and trusting your own brother isn't stupid, it's normal. That understanding helped reduce some of the guilt I carried about not discovering the theft sooner, though I still got angry about it regularly. 4 months into Elliot's probation, I got a call from the nursing home saying he'd tried to visit Mom. A staff member recognized him from the fraud investigation and stopped him at the front desk, then called security and reported the probation violation immediately. I was proud of that staff member for following the protective order instead of letting Elliot charm his way past the rules like he used to. The probation officer hauled Elliot back to court within days, and I attended the hearing to make sure the judge understood how serious the violation was. Elliot claimed he just wanted to check on Mom's well-being and didn't think a brief visit would hurt anything, but the judge wasn't buying his excuses. She extended his probation by 6 months and told him that one more violation would mean jail time, no exceptions. Elliot looked smaller somehow standing in front of the judge, nothing like the confident brother who used to lecture me about responsibility. I left the courthouse feeling satisfied that at least someone was holding him accountable, even if he'd never face real prison time for what he did. A mutual acquaintance named Sandra called me one afternoon saying Tanya wanted to apologize and hoped we could talk. I told Sandra I wasn't interested in hearing from Tanya now or ever, and Sandra should tell her that directly. Tanya benefited from every single dollar Elliot stole, posting photos of designer bags and European vacations on social media, while Mom got inadequate care at a facility that thought she was a charity case. She only filed for divorce to protect herself legally once Elliot got arrested, not because she suddenly developed a conscience about elder abuse. Sandra tried to convince me that Tanya felt terrible and wanted to make amends, but I cut her off and said Tanya could feel terrible on her own time. I didn't owe her forgiveness or even a conversation, and I wasn't going to waste emotional energy on someone who watched Elliot steal from a woman with dementia and said nothing. Sandra stopped calling after that, which was fine with me. Mom's dementia progressed over the following months, her good days becoming less frequent, and her confusion getting worse. The new facility provided adequate care with trained staff who checked on her regularly and made sure she took her medications, but it wasn't special or particularly nice. I hated walking into that basic room with standard furniture and plain walls, knowing Mom deserved the nicer place Elliot had chosen while pretending to pay for it. The anger at Elliot never really went away when I visited Mom, seeing her in this adequate but unremarkable facility that was all we could afford after he stole everything. She'd ask about Elliot sometimes during her more lucid moments, wondering why her devoted son stopped visiting, and I'd make up excuses about him being busy with work. Telling her the truth would only confuse and upset her, so I protected her from knowing what Elliot really was, even though it meant lying to her face every visit. The restitution payments arrived in chunks over 6 months as Elliot's assets got sold, and the court processed everything. The boat money came first at $45,000, then the vacation house at $120,000, then smaller amounts from selling his furniture and electronics that the court seized. After legal fees and asset sale costs got deducted, the total came to $195,000, which I deposited directly into Mom's care account. It was nowhere near the full $800,000 Elliot stole, but it covered Mom's immediate care costs and provided a small cushion for future needs. I kept detailed records of every restitution payment and every expense, building a paper trail that would prove I managed Mom's money properly, unlike my thief brother. The recovered money felt like a small victory, even though it represented less than a quarter of what Elliot took. At least some of Mom's savings came back instead of being completely gone forever, and that was better than nothing. The remaining $600,000 was just gone, spent on boats and vacations and designer clothes that had no resale value. Elliot's bankruptcy filing meant there was nothing left to recover from him personally, and Crystal the prosecutor explained this was typical in elder abuse cases where the money gets spent rather than hidden. Stolen money that buys experiences or gets eaten up in daily luxury living can't be recovered, unlike money sitting in a bank account somewhere. I had to accept that most of Dad's life insurance money and Mom's retirement savings were permanently lost, converted into Elliot's memories of European trips and photos of him on his boat. That acceptance came slowly and painfully, requiring me to let go of the idea that justice meant getting everything back. Justice in this case meant Elliot having a felony conviction and some money recovered, but not full restitution, and I had to learn to live with that incomplete resolution. Aunt Jillian and I started talking every week on the phone about Mom's care and family matters, building a relationship that had been distant before Elliot's theft brought us together. She helped me understand our family dynamics better, explaining that Elliot had always been the golden child who got away with everything while I was expected to just go along with his decisions. Jillian admitted she always thought Elliot was too smooth and perfect, the kind of person who seemed great on the surface but made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't quite explain. Hearing that made me feel less stupid for being fooled by Elliot's act, since even people who suspected something was off didn't imagine he was capable of stealing $800,000. Jillian became my main support system for dealing with Mom's care decisions and the ongoing stress of managing everything from 3 states away, and I was grateful to have family I could actually trust. A year after Elliot's arrest, I'd built a stable system for managing Mom's care with proper oversight and support from Jillian and Ophelia. The financial situation was secure through Medicaid covering most costs, and the recovered restitution funds providing extras that made Mom's life better. I'd learned to advocate effectively for Mom's needs, speaking up when the facility staff missed something or when Mom's care plan needed adjusting. The 3-hour drive every other weekend became routine again, but now I was actually in control instead of blindly trusting someone else to handle everything. I could verify Mom was getting proper care, check her medications, talk to her doctors directly, and make decisions based on her actual needs instead of Elliot's lies. The system wasn't perfect and Mom's situation wasn't ideal, but it was honest and adequate, which was what really mattered. Elliot's probation officer called me one afternoon to verify he was staying away from Mom as ordered. I confirmed I hadn't heard from Elliot since the court hearing where his probation got extended, and I didn't want to hear from him now or in the future. The probation officer mentioned Elliot was working at a retail store stocking shelves because his felony conviction made professional employment nearly impossible, and he was struggling to make his restitution payments on a minimum wage salary. I felt zero sympathy hearing about Elliot's struggles, since he brought every consequence on himself by stealing from our mother. He could work retail forever and struggle with money for the rest of his life, and it still wouldn't equal what he did to Mom. The probation officer thanked me for confirming Elliot's compliance with the protective order and said to call immediately if he tried to contact me or Mom. I promised I would, then hung up and went back to reviewing Mom's medical bills, making sure every charge was correct and properly coded for insurance. My therapy sessions became a regular Wednesday afternoon thing, sitting in a small office that smelled like lavender while I tried to untangle the mess of feelings about Elliot. The therapist asked me to describe what I was experiencing, and I told her it was like being glad someone got punished while also mourning them at the same time. She nodded and explained that I could be relieved Elliot faced consequences while still grieving the brother I thought existed, because those were two separate things. The brother who brought donuts to nursing home staff and showed me spreadsheets every month never actually existed. That person was a performance Elliot created to hide his theft, and I was allowed to grieve losing what I thought was real, even though it wasn't. She helped me understand that mourning the relationship didn't mean excusing his actions or wanting to forgive him. I could be sad about losing my brother while still being furious at what he did to Mom, and both feelings were valid and didn't cancel each other out. Some weeks I left therapy feeling lighter, like I'd made progress in separating the grief from the anger. Other weeks I left feeling worse because acknowledging the grief meant accepting that Elliot really was gone from my life forever, not just temporarily while we worked through a problem. Mom had mostly bad days where she was confused and agitated, asking for people who'd been dead for years, or insisting she needed to go home to a house we'd sold decades ago. But one Saturday afternoon in October, I walked into her room and she looked right at me with clear eyes and said my name correctly. She asked about my job and seemed to actually follow my answers, nodding and making appropriate comments instead of staring blankly or talking about something completely unrelated. Then she asked where Elliot was and why he hadn't visited lately, her voice full of genuine confusion about her devoted son who used to come every day. I felt my stomach drop because I hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't figured out what to say if Mom was lucid enough to actually notice Elliot's absence. I couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't explain that her beloved son had stolen everything from her and was legally barred from contact. So I lied and said Elliot moved away for work, got transferred to another state for a really good job opportunity. Mom looked sad but accepted the explanation, saying she wished he'd told her, but she understood that good jobs were hard to find. She asked if he was happy in his new place, and I said yes. He seemed to be doing fine, and the lie tasted bitter in my mouth. The lucid moment only lasted about 20 minutes before Mom drifted back into confusion, asking me if I'd seen her mother recently, and insisting we needed to pick up my dad from the train station. But those 20 minutes haunted me for days, knowing that Mom's clearest moment in months was spent missing the son who'd robbed her blind. The nursing home staff at the new facility took a few months to really understand Mom's patterns and needs, but gradually they figured out what worked for her. One aide named Maria learned that Mom calmed down when she talked about gardening, so she'd sit with Mom during agitated episodes and discuss tomato plants and rose bushes until Mom relaxed. Another aide discovered that Mom responded better to showers in the evening rather than morning, so they adjusted her care schedule accordingly. The activities director noticed Mom enjoyed music from the 1960s and started playing those songs during her visits, which sometimes brought Mom out of her confusion for brief periods. It wasn't the luxury care Elliot had pretended to provide with his fake stories about daily visits and special attention. The rooms were smaller, the staff busier, the food more institutional. But it was honest care from people who actually showed up and did their jobs, who learned Mom's real needs instead of providing minimal service while Elliot pocketed the difference. The aides genuinely seemed to like Mom, talking about her funny comments during lucid moments or her surprisingly strong grip when she got agitated. They treated her like a person instead of a charity case, which was what Mom needed all along. I started to relax slightly about her care situation, knowing that while it wasn't perfect, it was adequate and real. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in a formal business envelope with a law firm's return address. Inside was a typed letter from Elliot's lawyer explaining that Elliot wanted to reach out to apologize and ask for forgiveness. The letter included a handwritten note from Elliot himself, 3 pages of his neat handwriting explaining that he'd been going to therapy and working on himself. He wrote that he understood what he'd done was wrong and he'd made terrible choices driven by financial stress and poor judgment. He claimed he'd changed, that he was a different person now, that he deeply regretted hurting Mom and me. He asked if we could talk, if I'd be willing to hear him out, if there was any path toward reconciliation and forgiveness. I read the letter once, felt absolutely nothing, and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond to his lawyer or acknowledge receiving it. I wasn't interested in Elliot's redemption arc or his therapy breakthroughs or his newfound understanding of his mistakes. He could work on himself if he wanted, could go to therapy every day and become the best version of himself, but I didn't owe him anything. I didn't owe him forgiveness or a conversation or even acknowledgement that I'd received his letter. Elliot stole $800,000 from our mother with dementia and used it to buy boats and vacation houses while she was about to be evicted from her care facility. He could spend the rest of his life being sorry, and it wouldn't change what he did or earn him absolution from me. The letter stayed in the drawer, and I went back to managing Mom's care and building my new life without Elliot in it. Aunt Jillian flew in for a long weekend, and we spent Saturday afternoon with a financial advisor discussing how to protect the restitution money for Mom's future needs. We'd received about $195,000 total after legal fees and asset sales, and most of it had gone to paying Chester and covering immediate care costs. But there was about $40,000 left, and Jillian wanted to make sure it was managed properly instead of just sitting in a checking account. The financial advisor suggested establishing a small trust fund specifically for Mom's care needs beyond what Medicaid covered. It wouldn't be much, maybe generating a few $100s monthly in income, but it meant Mom could have small comforts and extras that made her daily life better. We could pay for nicer toiletries, additional activities, small treats and gifts that Medicaid didn't cover. The advisor helped us set up the trust with me as trustee and clear documentation of how funds could be used, all focused on Mom's care and comfort. Jillian contributed another $10,000 of her own money to the trust, saying she wished she'd been more involved earlier, and this was her way of helping now. We signed all the paperwork and left the advisor's office feeling like we'd done something positive, created a small safety net for Mom even though it was nowhere near what Elliot had stolen. The trust wouldn't restore the $800,000 or give Mom the luxury care she deserved, but it was honest money managed properly for her actual benefit. 2 years after I discovered Elliot's theft in that hospital billing office, Mom's situation had stabilized into a sustainable routine. Her care was properly funded through Medicaid and the trust fund Jillian and I established, with regular payments made on time and proper documentation of every expense. Elliot was a convicted felon on probation, working retail and making his monthly restitution payments, his perfect reputation permanently destroyed. I'd processed most of my anger through therapy, learning to separate my grief about losing my brother from my fury about what he'd done. The family I thought I had was completely gone. That fantasy of the devoted son and supportive sibling relationship revealed as Elliot's elaborate con. But I'd built a new support system with Aunt Jillian, talking weekly and visiting Mom together sometimes, creating an honest relationship based on actually showing up instead of performing devotion. I'd learned to trust my instincts again after Elliot trained me to doubt myself and feel guilty for questioning him. When something seemed off now, I investigated instead of accepting explanations that sounded good, but didn't add up. I'd become a fierce advocate for Mom's care, speaking up when the facility missed something or when her needs weren't being met, no longer worried about being seen as difficult or demanding. The transformation from guilty absent daughter to empowered guardian took 2 years of therapy and hard work, but I was proud of who I'd become through this disaster. I still sent money monthly for Mom's care, but now it went directly into an account I controlled at a bank where I could verify every transaction online. I could see exactly what the nursing home charged, what medications cost, what extras were purchased for Mom's comfort. Every expense was documented and tracked, with receipts saved and statements reviewed regularly. The difference between sending money blindly to Elliot and managing it myself was the difference between being manipulated and being empowered. When I sent Elliot $2,000 monthly, I had no idea if it actually helped Mom or just funded his boat payments. Now when I sent money, I knew exactly where it went and what it purchased, and I could verify that Mom actually received the care and items I paid for. The transparency felt revolutionary after 2 years of trusting Elliot's fake spreadsheets and accepting his word that everything was handled. I'd learned that protecting vulnerable people meant maintaining oversight and asking questions, not just trusting family members to do the right thing. Managing Mom's finances directly was more work than delegating to Elliot had been, but it was honest work that actually protected Mom instead of enabling her son to rob her blind. Looking back at the night I drove through darkness to reach that hospital, I was proud that I acted immediately when I discovered the theft, instead of letting family loyalty keep me silent. I could have confronted Elliot privately and given him a chance to fix things quietly, could have worried about his reputation, or his marriage, or his future. But I called Adult Protective Services from the hospital lobby within an hour of learning the truth, and that decision meant Mom got some justice and Elliot faced real consequences. Mom's $800,000 was mostly gone, spent on luxury experiences that couldn't be recovered, but she got proper care funded through Medicaid and restitution money. Elliot became a convicted felon whose perfect facade was destroyed, and everyone who believed his devoted son act now knew he was a thief. I learned that protecting vulnerable people sometimes means turning in your own family, reporting them to authorities, and watching them get arrested and prosecuted. And that wasn't betrayal. That was love. Because real love means protecting people from harm even when the person causing harm is your own brother. Elliot probably saw my actions as vindictive or cruel, calling the police and cooperating with prosecutors instead of handling things privately. But I knew that letting him get away with stealing from our mother with dementia would have been the real cruelty, allowing his victim to suffer while protecting her abuser because we shared DNA. I made the right choice that night in the hospital lobby, and 2 years later, I still believed that with absolute certainty.